Hey, Neil. Welcome, everyone. It is February 28th, Wednesday, right? Today's Wednesday.
Wednesday.
And
Tomorrow's the leap day.
we're here for another Texas Grassroots Alliance live stream. And so we're going to do something a little different. This is going to be a little shorter video for all those who've been hanging in there with us. You won't have to hang in as much today. But we are going to have an open-ended conversation with all of you, with each other, and with all of you. So if you want to jump in and participate, feel free to add comments in YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, and we will pick up your conversations and your points and your comments into this live stream. So we're going to talk a little bit about just tough conversations.
Right.
And why it's important that we have tough conversations in our communities, regardless of what benefit it gives to a political party or to an elected official or to a particular community. Just having tough conversations that may be difficult for one reason or the other that can cause tension, but it's really important that we have tough conversations.
Tough conversations within communities, and then tough conversations also across communities.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think as grassroots organizers, Neil, like I always find myself in, it could be one-on-one conversations, it could be in a group setting conversation, it could be in an event type situation, or just, anything else that if there's more than two or three people, if there's more than yourself, really, there's an option for there to be a tough conversation. Not that I don't already have tough conversations with myself, though, too.
Right. No, that's very right. And you find yourself saying stuff like, just between you and us. And sometimes I will say that, and I'll ask myself, do I need to say that? And why am I saying that? And I don't feel I'm saying anything that is that I'd be ashamed for others to hear. But you're concerned. You're concerned about how things are interpreted, or you're concerned about wounding someone involved in activism as well. And these conversations are we're doing unpaid work where I'm just sort of spitballing it out, but we're doing unpaid work. Activist spaces can be unforgiving. People have strong views. Some people are in an ideological space. Other people are in more of an identity space, although those are fluid concepts. So there's all sorts of things to trip over. And one of the things hardest there's no guardrails. So if we're in a workplace and our paycheck's dependent on this, we know, hey, don't say that. No one wants to hear that in a workplace. But we're making it up as we go along. But it's an alternative structure, and there's no HR manual. There's no HR director,
right?
And so you're navigating it day by day.
Well, and this is the heart of like existing in a society together, right? How are we neighbors with each other? How are we community members with each other? And we have a system of government that requires us to come together to decide what we want to have in terms of representation as well as policies. And so that means tough conversations are going to have to be had because people have different experiences, people have different education, people have different values. Even if you have similar values, the point of emphasis within those values could be different, right?
Right.
So you could care about, people having benefits, for example, as in terms of employment, but that range of solutions will vary for people in terms of their perspective on it. And then you have the whole dynamic of how race and gender plays a part in our society. And so it can become very, people can become very reluctant to have conversations because a couple of reasons, I think. One, we know that there's a lot of trauma that has impacted people, and you don't want to contribute. I think from my perspective, right, I don't want to contribute to anything negative in terms of a conversation with somebody that
Sure.
is, you know, not thinking of the other person as a whole person, right? But I think the other part is ignorance. We're afraid to show our ignorance. And I think right now it's a very unique space where we're on the internet. We have access to a bunch of information. We have much more insight on things than people did 40 years ago. But it doesn't mean that we're not any less ignorant. And and so people shy away from conversations because they don't want to show their ignorance. And I think we need to be able to talk and have tough conversations to be able to address that potential lack of education. It could be potential prejudice that you grew up with, or you've been, embedded with from family or environment, or whatever the case is. But we're not going to overcome any of these things if we don't have tough conversations.
And then there's also, I think, right. So, and plus, these are the very subjects we're talking about. So, unlike if we were in a workplace where we could be talking about the weather or the Astros game or the Mavericks game, here we are directly in spaces where we are talking about these very issues of gender and identity, belief, and religion. Right. So the topic itself is inherently. So our topics are there inherently. And I think also, and we have this is Texas Grassroots Alliance live stream. We're talking about tough conversations. It's a shorter, about a 20-minute broadcast today. And if there's a conversation that you've shied from or an experience you've had, put it in the chat. Put it in the chat. I also think sometimes that activist spaces sometimes are unforgiving,
Mhm.
in part because the stakes are so high and people come in with strong views. I remember it's I don't see it as prevalent. I know here in Houston there was a lot of calling out of people online. I remember that, and the calling out just basically would say you are this terrible person, or you have these terrible views. You have these
Mhm.
terrible views, and I think people shied away, have and still do shy away from conversations with the concern that it won't be private in the end,
Mhm.
or that it will get broadcast. And I think a call out culture and activism is not a beneficial um, not a beneficial culture.
Well, it's what its intentions are. I think there can be calling out that can be that may be needed if someone is showing some sort of, blind spot, or lack of education or ignorance on something, but still forging ahead without understanding some of these other elements that people can provide. But I think it's all about intention. What are we calling out people for? Do we want to call them out to where they no longer exist in our community and they no longer exist in our purview and they no longer, or do we want to call them out to try to reconcile this so that we can be hopefully in sync and talk through whatever this tension is. Um, I think it comes down to intention. I think, Neil, what you're talking about is when people call out for the sake of making themselves feel better versus calling out for the cause. Like, there can be a lot of ego in these conversations. There can be a lot of ego in activism, and I
Yeah.
and I think when people are prioritizing their ego versus trying to build community and build power, then you start working around trying to manage, things like grace and understanding, and you know having desires for reconciliation around things, so that we can move forward. Because for the most part, a lot of times people are in sync with each other on a whole number of issues, but there's the nuance that maybe they're not in sync on, or maybe there is one particular issue they're not in sync on, but they're in sync on 45 other issues, right?
So that takes you right up to Israel, Gaza, and Palestine. So we're talking about tough conversations and people who agree, and people are. It's like a Fred Astaire. I'd say I was dating myself, but I'm not old enough for Fred Astaire. But it's a it's like a dance routine to avoid in so many different circles talking about Gaza, Palestine, Israel, because it evokes so much. And so you are seeing, I'm seeing in spaces I occupy tensions, and you just can't discuss it. I mean, people can't discuss it in families. Even, and this isn't like a Trump Hillary divide. It's not a Republican Democratic divide. It's people who agree with each other substantively on just about everything, but talk about something that is a tough conversation that is cleaving activist community.
Yeah. And I think I'll share my experience, like with when it comes to Israel and Palestine as an example. I think one of the recognitions I had to have for myself was how ignorant I am in this conversation. How
Yeah.
much I don't know in terms of the history of the region. How I don't know the various things that have happened within that community. What was leading up to what happened in October 7th, and even how media is covering this topic, right? And so I think for me, I have benefited from people who are more informed and more educated as a chance to listen in this situation, in this conversation, versus trying to jump in and say, like, you know, here's what needs to be done, and moving forward with something that I know I am inadequate in terms of my education, but I do still want to talk about it, right? I still want to understand it. It's important for us to still discuss the various ways this impacts people and communities, whether they are in the region or whether they're in Texas and Houston and Fort Worth or wherever else.
I was turning my head and looking. I was because I don't know. I don't have great knowledge about the issue, so I went out and bought a book, A History of Middle East. I haven't gotten to it yet, so I could speak with half information. I'm still not at the half information point. And these things, and this is so much. Of course, so much of this stuff is personal. So we're talking about abortion. We're talking about race. We're talking about, so people are in these things because it's so personal to them. And so on the Israel, a substantial portion of my family is Jewish, and so this gets at, regarding the current action of Netanyahu or the current action, the anger makes them feel wary for their security. They don't necessarily support the action. And I'm not speaking for anyone, but they don't necessarily support the action. But these things are so this is another issue that's bound up in the personal. So one of the reasons that these conversations are so tough is that they are bound up in the personal, and we find ourselves as activists in spaces or having opinions that things that we are not personally have experienced. Issues pertaining to women, I've not personally experienced that, and so we're dealing, inherently with someone whom knows that topic better. Yet here we are in those spaces, and we have opinions. So all you can do is learn to the best that you can, proceed with an open heart, know that your intentions are okay, and hope that everyone will extend each other the grace to allow their opinions, as long as they're offered good-heartedly and are subject to amendment.
Yeah. I think it all goes back to this intention thing. I think when you are your intentions are wanting the world to be a better place, right? But then what does that mean? In what ways? And how will it make a negative impact in some ways that are either unforeseen or that are foreseen, and how do you address those based on whose perspective it is? Now, a lot of times, because of the way Western society is made up, right? Like the fight ends up becoming against white men versus a lot of other populations, right? Because we've structured society, America has been structured to benefit white men first, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then how do you have conversation? How do we ensure that when white men have the intentionality of wanting to solve this as well, that we're having those conversations to build that power as a collective, um, versus and helping people in that space to be able to navigate whatever the topic it is, whatever the issue is, whatever the lack of understanding is. And at the same time, how do we have those conversations to where when it comes for me, like within the Latino community, that there is going to be a divide between values and there is going to be a divide, and people want to view my community as a monolith and they want to be able to apply all of these assumptions and expectations when that's not reality, right?
Sure.
It's going to be different. So I think in terms of all these tough conversations, it just that intentionality becomes so important in terms of what are we trying to do together, and
Right.
and this is why a lot of grassroots organizing people do it for free, because they're afraid that money will be seen as the intentionality, and that starts to compromise why they're doing what they're doing. And while I understand that, we still need to be able to compensate people when they're putting an immense amount of labor and skill into work. And we've got to be able to have a conversation to support them without saying, okay, well, I don't know how to talk about this, so just do this work for free and save
Right.
democracy.
No, activism is not a vow of poverty. I'll say as a white guy, if I had a buck for every time I went to a setting and people, like whispered, "Is that a cop?" I'd have about 12. I'd have about 12 or $13. And so, and you go into spaces and people will look at you sometimes in some spaces, but the way you deal with that is just keep showing up and hi, and and it all pretty much works out actually. And with the vow of right, it's not a vow of poverty, and people need to, and people who are relatively privileged or who have, I have been, I've had people say, "Oh, I don't want to be paid for this. I don't need the money." Well, someone else does, and if you create an atmosphere where, um, if you don't need the money, then accept the money and give it to the guy or the woman whom you think needs the money, or to the cause that you
Right.
value. Okay, but don't create an atmosphere where because these politicians and some of the nonprofits linked to and many of these nonprofits have good people in them. So it's not a condemnation, but they're profiting off of labor structures that are just totally exploitive. And if they think there's a constant labor pool there, that they can always get the work done for free, and that hoards the knowledge gain from doing the work also within a class, within an almost kind of aristocratic class in a way that has a kind of noblesse oblige sense of, I don't need the money. Well, sure, you need the money. Give it to somebody. Um, so these conversations. So as we're wrapping up, correct? We're in our last couple
Yep.
minutes
And I
here.
do want to highlight, we did get a comment from Ricardo, who is a part of the Texas Grassroots Alliance. Um, he talked about an example that he had where he got in trouble at his last job for calling out Columbus Day, celebrating a genocidal jerk who enslaved and mistreated First Nations people and stole their land.
How did my Aunt Mary become your boss, Ricardo? Don't. She's a Rhode Island Italian, and oh boy, if you Aunt Mary have you right out of there. She would have fired you.
Yeah, and that just that goes back to like education, um, how we're taught about these kind of things, these kind of moments in history, and then what is our process to actually reconcile when things have been presented to us in a deficient, incorrect way. And when you have people in society like we have today in Texas, where they want to curate education to be a certain type of education versus being real education, then this is going to cause tensions in our communities, because this may go on for 2 years, for 10 years, for 20 years.
Oh man,
It just
you
depends.
got me in the grave, man. I'm in the grave.
It just depends, right? And so we're having this constant issue of how we are talking with each other and what the education is of everyone, what the perspective, what the experiences of everyone, that it's important for us to reconcile and understand the human that is in front of us and navigating those conversations and the people who are in front of us versus taking a shortcut stereotypical approach to what we expect out of these people and then having a predetermined position around how we're going to navigate those conversations. And I think that's one of the ways we get in trouble with these tough conversations, is that we're not actually talking to each other as people. We're talking to people as almost as entities instead.
So, first of all, thanks to Ricardo for the comment. So, Texas Grassroots Alliance live stream. This is our 5th program, I believe, and this is our 6th program. Mm-hmm. And we're trying different formats. We've had guests, we've had longer forms. It's directed towards the listener. It's grassroots, so the reader, the viewer. So we're very appreciative of the comment. We're experiencing with different formats, and you can. We'd love to know what folks would like to what works. And this is a new kind of quicker pop-up format that I think has great promise.
Yeah. So let us know in the comments, what tough conversations do you find are frustrating or a struggle, or you wish we could do better around? And we'll use that as potential future live streams to have those topics highlighted and to be able to dig in a little deeper. So yeah, keep plugged in, keep watching, and thanks everyone for being here.
Thank you.